Good evening, everyone. Sorry for the delay in start. We're still waiting for one of our speakers tonight, but we will begin. Before I hand you over to Jonathan Rugman from Channel 4 News, who will be chairing tonight's discussion, if I can just ask you to switch your phones to silent, and when it comes to questions, if you can wait for the microphone because we are broadcasting live. Over to Jonathan.
Thank you, Millicent. Well, we have a fantastic panel. Currently we have 4 Egyptians on the stage. You'll have to, for one night only, consider me an honorary Egyptian. My father was born in Egypt. My grandfather died in Egypt. And in fact, my father fled the revolution in the 1950s. And ever since, I've been going in the opposite direction, making up for lost time, because I was there in 2011 and I've been there this last 10 days. I will introduce the panel in a moment, but I thought I would start with a few provocative thoughts. A week ago today, I went to the swearing-in ceremony of the new interim president of Egypt. I was the only foreign journalist there. I just knocked on the door of the Constitutional Court and said, "Can I come in?" And they said, "Yes, all right then." And no security check, nothing. Walked in. There was a swearing-in ceremony. All the generals who had made this possible stayed away. Everybody clapped. And then there was a sort of family photo of the new president with the fellow judges of the Constitutional Court. And I seized my moment and I interviewed the new president of Egypt. And I said to him, what do you say to all the millions of people who didn't vote for you? In fact, nobody voted for you, Mr. Mansour. And he said, I speak with the authority of Tahrir Square. Tahrir Square chose me. It was quite a strange juxtaposition between a 67-year-old jurist who'd never really been out of a courthouse in a suit and tie, saying he spoke for Tahrir Square. The other thing he said, which I thought was interesting, was that the Muslim Brotherhood were part of the fabric of Egypt, that there must be a place for them in the society, and that they should take part in whatever democratic transition follows. A bit rich to say that when their leaders have been arrested, their television stations closed down, and of course a few days later scores of them were killed. The cover of this week's Economist, Egypt's tragedy. Well, is it really? There'll be millions of Egyptians who will tell you it's no tragedy at all. They'll say it's a triumph for what you might call revolutionary street democracy, a kind of mass movement of people which is more powerful than the ballot box. That would be their view. And that will be something we can explore this evening. I can tell you that driving around Cairo on the night President Morsi was put under house arrest, it certainly didn't feel like a military coup. And in fact, I was stuck in traffic because all the bridges were clogged with people celebrating. Out in Rabat, where the Muslim Brotherhood had tens of thousands of people on the streets, they were not celebrating at all. But I wrote at the time, and I resorted to Twitter because I was stuck in traffic and there was nothing else to do. It doesn't feel like a coup in the streets, more like the army and protesters using each other to get what they want before retiring to barracks or to bed. That's how it felt, and I think I stand by that assessment. We can discuss whether it was a military coup or not. It seems to me it was, but actually the subtleties of it are worth exploration. We're joined on my left here by Mohamed Morsi, who is the online editor at BBC Arabic, who will bring the BBC's customary impartiality to the discussion this evening. Omar Ashur here is an academic at the University of Exeter, but he is also an expert on reforming the institutions of state, particularly the police, in the last week, and has been doing some advisory work with what was the Morsi government on that, which I thought would be very interesting to talk about. Maha Azam here is a commentator and writer on political Islam, who is extremely worried about the developments, who wonders why there haven't been elections rather than a military intervention of the kind that we've seen. And Mona Al-Kazaz has joined us. She's come down from Cambridge. She is the spokesperson of the Muslim Brotherhood in the UK. And her brother, I believe, is under arrest. amongst many hundreds of others, I think, at the moment. I thought we could start just by, I do apologise for being late, by the way, we were just waiting for a panellist to show up, and finally we've got underway, so thank you for bearing with us. Mona, it'd be great to hear from you first. Your sense of grievance must be huge. You had an election in 2012. You won 51% of the vote. The army let you win that election. They might not have done that, they did. And you must feel that everything that you had strived for, not just last year, but going back over decades, given that the Brotherhood had been excluded from politics, everything has been taken away.
Thank you very much for introducing me, and thank you very much for having me in the panel today. It's a great pleasure to be amongst all of you. It's not a personal tragedy, and I don't try to think of it as a personal tragedy. I think of it as a tragedy for Egypt. Since 2011, when we took part in the revolution in 2011, we didn't think of it. I didn't think of it, not even for a second, that we will be part of we will have a presidential candidate from the Muslim Brotherhood. We took part of it because we wanted positive change in Egypt. We wanted human rights. We wanted freedom of press. We wanted to be free Egyptians living in democratic Egypt. I, as a human being first, and being part of the Muslim Brotherhood, I think Egypt has went back for the day before 11th of February 2011. Every single democratic step in the democratic transition we're hoping for is just abolished by the military and an appointed president that, as you mentioned, no one has chosen. I am proud to be the brother of Khalid al-Qazzaz. I have two brothers. I'll just very, very briefly tell you the story of both my brothers. So my brother Khalid al-Qazzaz joined the Muslim Brotherhood when he was in Canada, when he was doing his degree, and then he joined the revolution in January 25th, and then eventually became part of the presidential team. And now he's it's incommunicado detention, so no one knows where he is. It's against his human rights. We haven't heard from him for over a week, and no one knows the condition of his arrest. And it was actually his birthday when he was detained, and his kids were waiting for him. They're saying, "When is Daddy coming for his cake?" So it's actually, for me, it's a personal tragedy. I don't want to think of it that way, but I also think of it as he was part of the revolution on January 25th, and then as a revolutionary, he thought he wanted reform. He joined the Freedom and Justice Party as it was formed, and then he was part of a presidential team as a revolutionary first, second as a Muslim Brotherhood member.
Let me bring in Omar here. We haven't yet got a representative of Tahrir Square here.
You don't have
No, we hope that she's on the way. Omar, if you can just sort of occupy those shoes. I know you're impartial in this, but if you can do that for me, it would help. Because the charge that you would put to Mona here is that the Muslim Brotherhood blew it. That they had a year in power, that the president was incompetent, and that petrol queues lengthened, electricity was hard to find, a $4.6 billion IMF deal was not signed, and that Egypt could not take another 3 years until the next election of President Morsi. That would be the response, wouldn't it?
Yes, to a large degree what happened was the following. The president from the very beginning was a very polarizing figure. He had 51% that voted for him, around 12 million people. He had 11 million people voting against him. And the expectations following the elections and following the revolution was soaring high. The people were having the slogans of freedom, social justice, which meant economic reform, which meant security sector reform, which meant dignity for Egyptian citizen, a complete alteration of the state in its institution, in its thinking, in its vision. And that were the expectations. And in a year, there were multiple blunders. There were quite a few of them. The polarization increased, it did not decrease. The attempt to contain it was, every time there was more failure than success, if I can put it this way. And more importantly, the economic conditions, the ideas of social justice were not there. The revolutionaries that voted for the president, many of the revolutionaries voted for him not because they like him and not because this was their first choice, me included, but they voted for him just to stop Ahmed Shafiq, who is Mubarak's prime minister, from coming and taking over and basically returning us back to the pre-January 2011. So all these revolutions had their idealistic visions, were very fiery in their approach, and wanted this reform to happen, and it did not happen. And that's why that camp, or a significant percentage of it, just moved to the other side and became part of the anti-Morsi camp. We can talk more about the implications, but
let me bring Dina in here, because Dina, you were in Tahrir Square on June the 30th when there was that huge protest. Millions
I was in Al-Ittihadiyya,
in the area,
in front
yes.
of the president's palace.
And your mother voted for Morsi, for the Muslim Brotherhood, and then when he fell, she cried tears of joy.
True.
I just wonder if you weren't here for Mona, to hear what Mona said, but Mona said that the Brotherhood was part of the 2011 revolution, and it feels it has been betrayed by those who have ousted President Morsi. People like you who protested for Morsi to go.
In what sense betrayed? We felt betrayed. We're the ones who felt betrayed that Morsi did not deliver. We're the ones who felt betrayed by all the promises that he has given, and he hasn't delivered on any of them. Omar gives so many examples. I just can give one, like the Constitution, for example.
This is the Islamization of the Constitution.
It's not about the Islamization of anything. It's about exclusion. It's not just about a certain ideology that we're afraid of or that we're tackling. It's not about Islam at all. It's about one faction wants to exclude all the other factions and wants to work alone and to be the hegemonic power in the state. We're the ones who felt betrayed.
Maha, Dina has a point here, that things did not go well under that first year. What do you say to her when she says millions of people turned out on the streets, as they did? That constitutes democratic legitimacy. That trumps what happened at the ballot box in 2012.
That's a very dangerous statement, because we had a democratic process underway. The danger of going with numbers on the street, and they were huge numbers, to say the least, on June the 30th, is that it can go the other way as well. And that ultimately we did have elections, presidential elections, parliamentary elections under Morsi. We had a referendum, albeit with a small turnout. And so we had a process. There was an alternative. The alternative was to go to parliamentary elections. I believe that the opposition underestimated its strength. It could have gone to parliamentary elections the second time round, although the judiciary had dissolved an elected parliament that happened through free and fair elections that had an Islamist majority, but that was dissolved. But it had a second chance. We had parliamentary elections around the corner. They could have organized, they could have campaigned, they could have had their people, different opposition groups in the parliament that could have then changed the cabinet, brought down the president, and there would have been accountability through institutions. The problem is here, again and again, there was a process to turn to the street and ultimately, and more importantly, to the military to oversee this change of presidency is extremely dangerous, because the military has been in power in Egypt for 60 years. And for the first time, there was a feeling that it may be slightly, ever so slightly, after the presidential elections that brought Morsi to power, just behind the scenes. It was still behind the scenes, but somehow that slowly over time, and with an elected parliament, you could slowly start to build a civil society and withdraw the military out of politics. You've brought the military straight back into politics again. Yes, they don't want to be in the limelight, they want to be behind the scenes, but they will certainly be able to set the political agenda of Egypt for the foreseeable future. And we have another battle to fight now, not only about democratization, but about the role of the military in society.
Can I bring Mohamed in here? I mean, isn't the problem with revolution that it's addictive, that once you have toppled a president, as happened in 2011, not so dissimilarly from last week in the sense that the military let it happen, but once you've achieved that success, you think, well, I'm not going to campaign for parliamentary elections. That's not what people do in Tahrir Square. They campaign for change there and then, the president to go. The people in Tahrir deal in absolutes. And so while Maha has a point, why couldn't you have had a parliamentary election campaign? They got 22 million signatures or so, they say, campaigning for Morsi to go.
Yeah, I mean, we've heard some very insightful views here, but I want to take a step back and try to understand what is happening and try to see, to look into the future by making two sets of comparisons. The first comparison is between 2011 and 2013. In both cases, the army, the military, took a decision to oust the president. In 2011, after 18 days of demonstrations, the military came out and took the decision that Mubarak must go. And the same thing happened in 2013 after three or 4 days of demonstrations. But there are three very important differences. The first difference is that in 2011, the street was united. This time, there's a very huge split in the street. The second difference is the level of violence that occurred after. I mean, we've seen the events at the Republican Guards headquarters or building of intensity, the intensity of which we have not seen before. And there seems to be a readiness to commit acts of violence from all sides, even before the 30th of June, when everybody was saying we're willing to die for our cause. And this is another difference that wasn't in 2011. The third difference is that the external influences that we're seeing now, that each side is reaching outside Egypt to various parties, Qatar, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, UAE, in a way that we haven't seen before. This is one comparison. The other comparison is between what happened in 1952 and then 54, 2 years later, when the Muslim Brotherhood joined the military in the new 1952 revolution. They were very much on the side of the military. 2 years later, they fell out for various reasons. Among them, the Brotherhood's wish to enforce aspects of the Sharia of the society, and which led to a major clampdown on the Muslim Brotherhood that pushed them underground, and the rift lasted for almost 60 years.
Can I bring Mona in here? I mean, I was curious, you should bring up the 50s. My grandfather's best friend was assassinated by the Muslim Brotherhood in the 50s. And I wondered whether, although the last thing President Morsi said on his presidential Twitter account was, keep it peaceful, whether you fear that you cannot control those who will feel very radicalized by what has happened and who may resort to violence.
I think I'll follow you.
So it's actually very interesting. There are millions of people on the street nowadays. Last night they calculated 3 million meals distributed in front of Rawat for people to break the fast. So there's actually a complete media blackout of what's happening.
You're not saying 3 million people are on the streets of Nasser City, are you?
They were hungry.
So
no Cairo say that this can be 3 million.
So
sorry, carry on.
So I say there are millions of people, not only in Nasser City, there are millions of people on the streets protesting, wanting President Morsi back. There are two different issues now being discussed. One issue is about the performance of the Morsi government, and this is open for public, political discussions.
I was going to ask you about that.
Another point.
Could you just answer that question about radicalization? Because we've had more than 50 people killed this week. And I was just curious to know whether you could control.
So the Muslim Brotherhood position has always been denouncing violence. I personally, as a human being, I would never support a group that would promote violence. I am a peaceful human being. I go for peaceful change. So the Muslim Brotherhood is against violence by any means. And looking at the thousands of people who were in front of the Republican Guards, if those people were actually armed, those people would have caused more harm to the military than one person, one shot soldier. So I'd actually sort of undermine the statement that was given by the military on TV. So I think the Muslim Brotherhood, so even my friend just came back from Cairo 2 days ago. He said, you actually very well searched before going into any of the demonstrations. No one is allowed any weapons to go in. So the Muslim Brotherhood are doing whatever they can to control the violence. They don't want any violence. As a spokesperson of the Muslim Brotherhood, I would reiterate again, we are going for peaceful protest, will prevent any form of violence as much as we can. Radicalization or not radicalization, I think the message this military coup has delivered to the radical groups is actually, you know what, you're not welcomed in politics. You're not welcomed to play the political game. President Morsi welcomed every group that denounced violence and welcomed them to actually contribute in the political life rather than actually taking part through violent means. And then the message that's being delivered to them now is, you know what, if you win through democracy, you're not allowed in. I just want to carry on the point I just mentioned, just very briefly.
Let me formulate it into a question, because I want you to make that point too. The question that we raised earlier was whether the Muslim Brotherhood presidency had messed up. The problem is that your supporters have been killed and arrested. So it must be very hard for you to acknowledge failure of any kind, I would have thought, because something quite undemocratic has happened here. But do you acknowledge that there were failures that may have led to this?
So the president himself, President Morsi, the legitimate president of Egypt, until now, he has said we've done some mistakes. And I think the opposition played a huge role in not being supportive. The opposition played a role even before he was in place. They asked him to give his position to Hamdin Sabah even before being sworn in as a president. So he was chosen by the people, and then he would, give it up to a presidential candidate who did not win. I think those presidential candidates lost in politics and came to power through on the military tanks. There are two different points being discussed here. One point is about what did the Morsi government achieve? And there were so many factors against President Morsi. One of the factors is that the opposition didn't want to cooperate and did not respond to any of the calls that the president called for inclusiveness of every other political party. That is one part. The other part is...
Well, I'm sorry. We will.
It's democracy, isn't it?
We will open it.
It's biased media, biased West, biased BBC, biased everywhere. It's biased. Biased all the way.
Well, please, the door is in the corner if you don't like what you're hearing. We will open the discussion up later on. Can I ask you,
Can I
Dina?
just finish my point?
Well, I think I'd like to.
Equal time. Equal time.
Dina, can I ask you this?
Really, already it's not balanced.
Look, I realise emotions are extremely heated about this subject, but we are trying.
This is a big society. 10 seconds to fight 20 minutes.
Let them finish. Let the Q&A once they finish.
Thank you very much.
Just like impossible. You debate, not propaganda.
Dina, I mean, the point has been made that the Muslim Brotherhood feel they've been deliberately excluded, which they have. Do you ever feel that you should be much more careful about what you should have wished for? Because the military is clearly heavily involved in this. It set an ultimatum for the president. It gave him his marching orders. Whatever you want in Tahrir Square, whatever kind of democracy you are hoping for, you don't have it at the moment. You have the military still pulling the strings.
Well, before I answer that, there are many points I want to make regarding all what has been said. First, I think it's very interesting to talk about the Muslim Brotherhood not wanting violence, while we have all heard many speeches in Arabic, maybe not in English, in Arabic, inciting violence. So it's interesting that the Muslim Brotherhood always says in English something that they say differently in Arabic. This is the first thing. The second thing, I am worried about radicalization very much, but I refuse to have the country blackmailed and threatened and taken hostage by this threatening us. If we go back to what we want, we will radicalize and we will kill you all, and this is unacceptable. The third point about democracy, this is the main thing that this is the main argument. Whenever we talk, they say democracy, democracy, and I love how they only interpret democracy democracy as ballot box democracy. They ignore completely what happened with minority rights, with religious minorities. They ignore completely what happened with women's rights. They ignore completely what the exclusion policy that the Muslim Brotherhood were having. We're not the ones who refused. He's the one who said that he will have national consensus on the constitution and then didn't deliver on it. He rushed it. Talking about opposition could have is something really good, but the president who had all the power actually could have done so many things.
But the point Maha made here,
his last speech on the 26th of June, as I understand, came very disappointing. He just kept ignoring millions of people signing the rebel
but surely
papers.
the point,
He just
can I just get a
ignoring.
question in here? The point that Maha made earlier was that why couldn't you have asked for a parliamentary election? Why did you have to say he has to go?
We did. The people wanted him gone. He kept ignoring.
Well, the people in Tahrir Square and Alexandria and other places
He kept ignoring us. He kept ignoring the signatures. His last speech was very disappointing. He could have taken regulations. He could have asked for we didn't have to dialogue. He could have taken decisions about amending the constitution. He could have taken decisions about involving the opposition, and he didn't. He didn't. He was ignoring us all the way till the people were fed up.
And how many do you think you're talking about when you say the people are fed up? Because estimates vary hugely. And of course the army published those video pictures of how many people were pouring into Tahrir Square to try and make the point that there was this apparent majority on the street.
I was personally overwhelmed and taken by the sheer numbers on the streets. Everyone I know is on the streets. There are estimates of 20-something million. There are estimates of even 30
Nobody
million.
knows.
Well, there were, and you saw, like I saw, and you saw, and the world saw the numbers.
Can I?
Mona, what do you say to that? Because I mean, I was in Rabat where the Muslim Brotherhood were based, and you know the numbers did not compare.
Because we have the president in place. Why would we go out in millions to go out to support a president who's in place? So that they had a point to make. Some people had some legitimate demands, and it's up to them to make it. And we thought we'll play it democratically through the parliament. If they were so unhappy, they would have taken it through the parliament. But I hope the media wouldn't black out the demonstrations happening tomorrow. Millions of people are going tomorrow. There's an estimation only 20% of the people going out tomorrow are Islamists, as you like to label people, but the 80% are people actually pro-democracy. There are millions of people from every city in Egypt. They're going out to support democracy. It's actually the 2 points I wanted to make initially, where there is one, some people had legitimate demands for the president's, for President Morsi. Other people are now out supporting democracy. So there are two different cases and the violations of human rights we're seeing. So this morning, Amnesty International has produced a report against the violation the military has been doing against the peaceful protesters on the street now. And also Human Rights Watch as well has produced a report yesterday morning about the illegal detentions that have been happening in Egypt. Also, there are thousands of people on flight banned lists.
I think. Well.
What about the Shias that people have killed?
I think we should move the discussion on, if I may.
What about your violence?
Can I?
What about the Qaeda who are supporting you?
Can we have a discussion here, please?
Jihadist Muslims who are supporting you. What about the Taliban who are supporting you?
What about Hamas?
Omar, can I ask you a question?
You are talking
Sorry, listen, if you'd like to have a discussion amongst yourselves, please do, but not here, okay?
You are sharing, misrepresenting the facts, moderator.
Yeah, you are.
I don't care. I don't care.
We paid to listen to them, not you. So,
Omar, can I just ask you a question? The Americans have not called this a military coup, and the Muslim Brotherhood feel betrayed by that. They feel like, you know, we had America's support for what was happening. Now it seems that the peace treaty with Israel, the importance of the Egyptian army is more important than democracy in Egypt. What would you say to that?
First, a quick statement. The heart is really aching to see people who were once united against dictatorship, against oppression, for freedom, for social justice, to see the situation deteriorating to that extent, such that even the human dimension in this is being sacrificed, it's being put down. that we're in a real crisis, and I can tell you from what I know, I saw this horror movie several times before. I teach this horror movie. I teach civil wars. I teach coups. I teach security studies. And what I know about it, and you feel free to agree or disagree, once elected institution that has any kind of support on the ground gets removed by force, the prospects are not positive. The outcomes are never positive. I don't know of any case that a simple case I gave it before, Salvador Allende in Chile in 1973. He was voted in by 36%. 36%. The outcome was a coup by Pinochet, and it falls in one or four categories.
But a lot of
either a military-dominated political scene.
Since you've gone down, since you've gone down that route, a lot of Egyptians in this room would say that they could not go on with another 3 years of Mohamed Morsi.
They could have paralyzed the Morsi administration via institution, via parliamentary elections. What you did now is you sacrificed the ballots and went for the bullets.
And that's the difference with what the previous speaker said.
The ultimate arbiter.
They will win the election.
No, but this is, I think this is, no, but this is the crux. This is the crux.
Well, Maha, let me ask you this.
Can I just make that very short point?
Yes, you can, but let me just put it into a question. I mean, we're obviously witnessing a degree of polarization here in this very room. And you've picked up on that, and you're very worried about it. We're supposed to be having elections in February, according to this interim president. I mean, is this country now heading along a path of polarization which is irreversible, and that basically people are so polarized they can't get back together again?
I think it is polarized, and this is what Omar is trying to say, is you've disrupted the process. And I just want to pick up on the differences between 2011 and 2013. One major difference you didn't point to was that you had now a process. In 2011, when you overthrew a dictatorship, you didn't have the ballot box. You didn't have the possibility of parliamentary elections. So no, it isn't a dictatorship by any means comparable to Mubarak. No, I think that is something that the opponents of the Morsi regime have touted. And I think this is very, very important. In order to depose a president, the opposition had to vilify, and in the audience you see the opposition, you had to vilify and create untruths about a system. And in reality, the propaganda against the Muslim Brotherhood is not one that emerged today. It's one that's gone on for 60 years. It's the same propaganda that's touted today about the Brotherhood, that doesn't know how they've evolved, that doesn't know anything about the Freedom and Justice Party, doesn't know what their platform is, that basically is repeating and scaremongering people in the same way that it did under Nasser and under Sadat and under Mubarak. And I think that is a key element, but I think also there's another element. The odds were stacked against President Morsi from the start. What you had is a divided society of institutions such as the judiciary, the Ministry of Interior, the police, and so on and so forth, that really didn't want to facilitate anything. They didn't want change. It's not just the elite at the top of the rich businessmen and their interests. It was also the state, a decrepit 60-year-old state that was breaking at the seams, that was going to make sure that any reformer, Islamist or leftist, was going to fail. So if President Morsi was an Allende, he would have also failed.
Dina, I want to talk to you about the... journalists have been locked up. Obviously, Muslim Brotherhood leaders have been arrested. How do you sort of square that with your belief in a better Egypt? Because if this goes on, you may find yourself defending something you feel quite uncomfortable about.
We will never defend something that I will never defend something that I feel uncomfortable about. I will never defend any violence. I will never defend arbitrary arrests. However, if there has
but they're
been
happening
arrests,
now, Dina.
and I am condemning them, and I am condemning them personally. But if there are arrests based on cases related to inciting violence, if there are closing down of channels that have been inciting violence and could have even led to more violence, then if there are civil cases, legal civil cases, then I cannot say that I condemn them. I condemn them if they're arbitrary. I condemn them if they are wrongful. But I have to say that I love how people live in the West and they look at the people in Egypt who have been living had a very difficult year with no electricity, with no gas, and with no water, and just telling them, well, you should have lived for 3 more years because this is what our textbooks are telling us. Because this is democracy that we know and that we teach and that we learn. And other than that, it's not democracy.
This is not someone who
So
lived.
I'm sorry if we were scared.
This is not someone who lived in the West. This is some. You're talking about people. You're talking about people who sacrificed.
If we were scared of the Muslim, if we were scared of the Muslim Brotherhood, we wouldn't have given Morsi a chance. If my mom thought that the Muslim Brotherhood were monsters, she wouldn't have gone and voted for him. We gave him a chance. We voted for him, even those who are not in the Muslim Brotherhood, even those who were not pro-Morsi, because we really believed that he could do something. And if he was so crippled, then he should have came out and said, I cannot do anything, and resigned, not stayed in power.
Mona, can I ask you this? Can you imagine any circumstances in which the Muslim Brotherhood, with your brother being locked up, the Muslim Brotherhood would contest elections in February or by February?
So it's interesting because we took part in a democratic process, part of the democratic reform Egypt was going through. And it's interesting because it seems the louder you are as a man in the Middle East, or the louder you are generally, the more you get hurt. So the people, when they go out, shouting out loud on the street, they think this is how they can compromise democracy and democratic change. Whereas there are millions of people who are at home who would go for voting and go for the ballot box, but cannot. You're talking about older people, you're talking about women and children, and women and people who wouldn't want to go out. So I'm talking about, it's interesting.
Can you imagine the Muslim Brotherhood taking part in any elections after what's happened?
So when the coup happened and there was a statement by the military, they talked about inclusiveness. An hour later, the leader of the Freedom and Justice Party, the ousted, was put in prison. So what kind of inclusiveness, what kind of government we're asked to take part of if you put in prison the leaders of the political party that represent us? That's one question. Can I continue?
I think you know the answer to that. I think.
So it's very, very interesting. First of all, the Muslim Brotherhood is a democratic organization, and we vote. Just a second, excuse me. We vote for our murshids.
Please, let the lady on the panel speak. Please.
This is what we are preventing in Egypt.
Please. Mohammed, can I just ask you?
Excuse me, sir.
If you carry
Excuse
on,
me, if you carry on, I will have to ask you to leave because everybody's paid to listen to the panel. We will come to questions from the audience. We will do shortly.
We will come to the Q&A, but I must stress that it is a question and answer session. Questions, please, not speeches. Can I
comment in any meeting like this?
No.
So it's can I just very briefly just get on that? It's just interesting because most of the people who were killed on the streets over the past 10 days were members of the Muslim Brotherhood or people protesting by them. It's very, very interesting that people are claiming that we are inciting violence, and most of the martyrs who came out on those days are part of the Muslim Brotherhood.
I'm going to sum this up slightly earlier than I intended by turning to Mohammed here and asking him to sum up for us. I mean, we've heard a very heated debate. I hope it has shed as much light as it has heat on those who perhaps know less about it than others. And if you have any questions, things you don't understand, please ask the panel. But what are your concluding thoughts?
I mean, clearly the polarization that we're seeing is worrying. And as a journalist who speaks to both sides, I hear very strong grievances from both sides. And it's not a matter of right or wrong or black and white, and because each side has an argument that we have to listen to. And democracy a country doesn't turn from dictatorship to democracy overnight. Back in 2011, when people were calling it the Arab Spring and everybody was very optimistic, it doesn't happen that quickly. It takes years and years and years. We are in the first stages of a process that will take a long time. And I think, this is my personal view, that the challenge for Egyptians is to find some sort of system or mechanism that is inclusive of everybody and does not demonize the other, and do this as quickly and as bloodlessly as possible.
Inshallah, I think is all we can say to that. I'm going to throw the floor open to questions. If you could pose a question and do it in about 30 seconds or less, that would be marvellous. And the microphone will travel around the room. This gentleman here.
You just referred to a process to ensure that no one's demonized. What would you suggest? That's my question to you.
What process?
When the invasion of Iraq happened in 2003, people thought that Iraq would turn overnight to a democracy, and it didn't. I mean, it's still work in progress 10 years later. To set this process in motion, I mean, first thing, there has to be an agreement on basic, rules of engagement, if you like.
Yes.
I mean, the violence is one thing that has to stop. People have to accept that every part of the Egyptian society has to be represented. Every view has to be listened to, and this is something up to the politicians to ensure. And from seeing from outside, we don't have this yet. We don't have the calibers and the leadership that is capable of carrying the country at this stage. But hopefully, this will happen in the coming years.
Just following on from what you said, in terms of laying down the foundation, what would you suggest would be the first steps in order to proceed with this process?
First steps would be consensus on the roadmap, because the roadmap is not clear. Which order the elections should be, constitution and then presidential or parliamentary, and all of this has to be ironed out and has to be agreed and has to be inclusive, and no faction, no political or religious or any kind of minorities, men, women, have to be included and have to be party to reaching this consensus.
Let's take a different. Can we take a different question now? That'd be all right. Anybody else? The gentleman in the back with the glasses.
I have never seen any misrepresentation of facts as I have seen today, but this is not surprising. The Egyptian people made a revolution in 2011. They wanted social justice. They wanted a civil state. They never asked and they never demanded a religious state. The Muslim Brothers got into power by stealth. They were put there by rigging the vote, by pressure on the army. And now, Mike, I will tell you my question. Just give me a second. You've taken the floor and you've allowed all this misrepresentation of facts. Yeah, just shut up. Let me talk. Let me talk. Don't interrupt me.
Please ask a question.
The people of Egypt waited for a whole year for a president that he never fulfilled one single promise. I will ask Dr. Azam and I will ask Ms. Kazzaz. What does she say? What do they say to the Shiites who were lynched, and what do they say to the Shiites who were killed and lynched and beaten to death in Egypt a week before this revolution? What do they say to the young people who were thrown from the roof to their death? What do they say to the scores of Christians who were killed in Egypt all over the country and the churches that were burnt? What do they say to the Christians and Copts who were prevented from voting in the elections? What do they say to the rigging of the ballot boxes and printing already marked cards? What do they say to the niqabbed women who were voting time and time again in the circular movement? What do they say about it? Is that the democracy they are talking about? Is that the democracy? I tell you something. The Muslim Brothers, they like the judgment of the courts when it goes their way. When it doesn't go their way, they besiege the Constitutional Court. And Maha Azam called the judges yesterday corrupt. Maha Azam called the Egyptian people mob yesterday. I am not surprised, because your Murshid said, "Sod Egypt." Your Murshid and your Muslim brothers do not believe in Egypt. They believe in the Muslim Caliphate. Well, go out of Egypt. Egypt doesn't need you. The Egyptian people came out in the millions. Actually, to misrepresent the Egyptians and say they are divided is misrepresentation of the facts. The majority, the vast majority of the Egyptian people are against this clan, the terrorist clan that is supported by Al-Qaeda.
I'm going to...
May I just...
You may. I'd like to hear from both of you on that.
Yeah.
There was a specific, near the beginning of that point, there was a specific instance of the killing of Shia Muslims, which I think I'm right in saying President Morsi did not talk about. He appeared on a panel. He did not condemn the radical things he was hearing. Do you both want to pick up from there?
I think the condemnation... I'm not going to speak on behalf of the Muslim Brotherhood, but what? No, let me say I have a right, as others have a right, to defend a movement or to defend a political view in Egypt, and I'm not ashamed of that. There are enough people who defend the secular liberal view. I unashamedly say that I do support the FJP and the position of a democratically elected president, President Morsi. And I say that unashamedly. Now, no, you may laugh, but let me finish. To condemn the killing of Shias or Copts is something that is, it's a primary thing for any Muslim or any Copt, for any Copt or any Muslim. The point is that what we're seeing today in Egypt is a degree of violence that is escalating. And the worrying thing is that we have today an opposition that was so focused on getting rid of President Morsi. They're not seeing what's going to be happening in terms of arbitrary arrests and killings in Egypt. They will start with the Muslim Brotherhood, but they will end up killing the leftists and the revolutionaries and imprisoning them too. And this is the message that has to come out loud and clear. All Egyptians are going to be victims of this military coup, as they have been for 60 years.
But
to applaud dictatorship.
You don't know that, because isn't the lesson...
I don't know that from 60 years.
It already happened.
We don't know this from 60 years of the military and of the security services and the brutality of the police.
No, what I was going to say was, isn't the lesson of 2011 that if Tahrir Square and other protests do not get what they want, if they do get the kind of military nightmare you are describing, they will be back on the street.
Yes, but the thing is, we've put ourselves back, we've stepped back again. And the police was not reformed, the security services were not reformed. They stood, no, it's not only because of Morsi, it's because every time he tried to do anything, basically there was chaos on the street and the military stood back and watched.
All right, let's bring Mona in here. Specific allegations were made.
And for Egyptian liberals to support the military is actually shameful.
And sorry, specific allegations were made about the president's failure to condemn the killing of Shia Muslims and his apparent inability to act as a sort of consensus figure. What do you say?
So I don't, first of all, I don't talk as a spokesperson for the President Morsi. President Morsi has his team that are all now detained because as political prisoners at the moment. So I don't specifically talk about him or his positions, but there was a statement he issued an hour after the Shia murder happened, and he condemned it very clearly. So, and the statement is available online if anyone would actually bother to search search online. It's actually very, very interesting when we discuss democracy and reform and democratic reform, and people would think democracy is only in Tahrir Square. Tahrir Square was a symbol as revolutionaries, and I count myself as one of them. We chose Tahrir Square as a symbol. The problem is, even my revolutionary friends who had legitimate demands against President Morsi, who went out on Tahrir on that day, they found people, corrupt figures from the previous regime were out there with them, side by side, and figures of the previous regime were out there in Tahrir. People who were benefiting from the presence of the corruption didn't obviously want any form of reform, and they went out not wanting democracy, wanting the Mubarak tyranny back in place. So it's just interesting. So those people, many of them I know by name, thousands of the revolutionaries since 25th of January 2011, when the revolution was only 5,000 to 10,000 people in Tahrir, they changed camps and went to in front of Cairo University, and I can give you names and dates. And it's interesting as well because of the sexual harassments that has happened in Tahrir Square on that day. It's very, very interesting that they would say Muslim Brotherhood started those kinds of sexual harassment, I would never take such allegation, because many people, there are millions of people now demonstrating with the Muslim Brotherhood, and there's not a single case of sexual harassment amongst the Muslim Brotherhood demonstrations.
It's true, it's certainly a safer place to be than Tahrir Square. Can I take another question, please? This gentleman here.
Hello, hi. I just want to say I've just returned from Egypt, and I wanted to narrate a story that actually happened to me. I stayed at home because I don't speak Arabic, so I didn't feel safe on the street. By the way, I'm a PhD student, a philosophy student at King's College London, so I had nothing to do with anything. But I will say I know Mona from I know Mona from Cambridge University. I'm not Egyptian. I know Mona from Cambridge University, where I was studying beforehand. So I'm not hiding anything. No, I think it's important that I say this because I was very reluctant to do this. So a friend of mine came, who's Egyptian, and we went to Rabia.
So
and we were searched on the way in, and I remember we actually noted that I was actually surprised by the atmosphere because there was a lot of families there. There were people camped out. There were people eating. We stayed for a few hours and then we left. On the way home, we went home. To cut a long story short, I told my friend, I think we're being followed. And he told me, no, you're paranoid. So then we went to pray in the morning prayer, the Fajr. I'm a practicing Muslim. And the mosque was closed. And then we went home. And then my house was raided. The police raided us. They beat us on the floor. Thank God, not too much. I'm not going to exaggerate. And then they began to search and they robbed us. They robbed everything in our house. They robbed every single one of us. And you know what they were asking me? They were asking me questions like, are you Brotherhood? And it would take them about 30 seconds to realize I have apps. They were opening my laptop and finding essays on Immanuel Kant. I mean, that's about how politically involved I was in Egypt. But I really want to make this clear because some of the things I was detained for 16 hours. And the conversations that we're having, I bet, God is my witness. My friend spoke to one of the soldiers there, or whoever they are. They were wearing black uniforms. And he said, you watch that there will be oppression in this country. You know what he said? He said, it's already begun. I've already seen it.
Well,
he said, you don't know what I've been seeing.
Can I turn
and
that
you know
into
what?
a question,
You know what? I say something. I'm really disgusted that human beings can support this type of oppression, regardless of what you think of the Muslim Brotherhood. You know what? I have never been frightened like that in my life. I've never been put into that position. They were asking me questions. They were saying, are you a Muslim by choice? Are you a Muslim by culture?
Can I
and
just
you know
turn that into a question?
what kind of question is that? What kind of oppression is this?
Hang on a second.
And you know what? I think that everyone with conscience. Enough, right? Let's bring in the military to take me out, because that's the way in which the opposition in Egypt operates.
Omar, isn't the point the gentleman is making is that the deep state, as they call it in Egypt, the old Mubarak military machine, the intelligence machine, never really disappeared, and now it's coming back?
It never really disappeared. I can testify to that because of the part of the work that I was doing on. I'm not the kind of guy who's just going to chant slogans. I want justice, I want freedom. I wanted to do something about it, and I have some knowledge in that regards. Egypt is a body full of cancers, and chanting die cancer will not help. To kill the cancer, you need to know the chemotherapy and to know exactly how to get this cancer out of the way. So I know something about the security sector cancers, and I can tell you frankly that the amount of spoiler games that were being played, the amount of the pro-status quo factions, the ones who wanted to keep these kind of standard operating procedures, the torture, the repression, the interests of the security services basically are dominant in the Ministry of Interior, even during Morsi's time. During Morsi's time, Morsi was not really in that much of control. The group that wanted, the group I had the honor to work with within the Ministry of Interior, the junior officers who are reformists had a vision for a better Egypt, for a better security sector. That group was a minority, and one of them told me I was pro doing elections in the officers club to have an elected representative for the officers. He was telling me, listen, we are the minority. We are in the 37,000 officers that Egypt has. There are 150 to 200 who are supporting the reforms. The rest are not. So the institution will stay as it is if they elected somebody from them. And these are all some of the incidents that gives you I can go on and on, but there was fear
So you're
sometimes.
not surprised by what the gentleman
I'm not surprised at all. The thing is now, the anti-Morsi camp, it was a decentralized camp. There was a revolutionary part in it, a part that wanted really freedom, wanted social justice, wanted basically the slogans of January 2011 revolution. This faction is the weakest one. The strongest faction is up there, is the army, followed by the Ministry of Interior and its paramilitary forces and its resources, followed by Mubarak loyalists who have the wealth, who have the resources, who have the context in the state institutions, who have the media context, and then at the very bottom of the food chain are the revolutionaries, are these young men and women who fought quite hard to try to topple this. Now these guys are in trouble.
And individuals among them are in Rabaa today.
Today, Ahmed Maher, the head of April 6, he had this statement: "This is a coup, but nobody has the courage to say it is a coup."
Can we take another question? This lady, if you'd like to direct it to an individual on the panel.
This is directed to the entire group of you on the stage. I'm an American historian. I've been to Egypt, but have no expertise. 3 things. You've had army power in Egypt. Please go back further in history than 2011, because to understand anything, you have to understand, go back to Nasser, go back to Sadat, whatever. That's number 1. Number 2, democracy is never a 2-year thing. I'm an American. It is decades to get to. And maybe in UK it took even longer, because we... Number 3, if you could, A, be an audience that doesn't interrupt, but B, listen to each other, because you're making a third assumption, which is that mobs and Twitter will determine the course of events. I'm not a journalist, I'm a historian. I guarantee that won't happen. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Yes, this gentleman here.
I don't want to be provocative, but surely the last thing that Egypt needs is a lecture or a sermon from Americans after the way the Americans have backed the Egyptian military with billions of dollars over the years. But the main question about this, because I don't want to be provocative, but I was provoked, is that isn't the danger of this that the situation is becoming so extremely polarized, and I find it tragic. I'm a former British member of Parliament who loves Egypt. Okay? And isn't it the tragedy of this that you could so easily slide remorselessly into civil war? There was a balanced piece in the FT yesterday comparing Egypt now with Algeria in 1991. Surely one Iraq, one Syria is more than enough.
Can we ask Dina to answer that? Because the last person to hold a Kalashnikov would be Dina here.
You never know.
I mean, Egypt's not Libya. It's not packed full of weapons in quite the same way.
Can I say something about
But
that as well?
do you? We'll ask all of you. But do you worry about civil war?
No, I'm not worried about. I'm worried about violence. That's true, and I'm worried about violence because a lot of people are threatening violence. But I'm not worried about civil war because it's not like 40 million here and 40 million there. Like so many of the audience have already said, it is a faction against a whole nation that wants something else. I'm not worried about civil war because I know that people who took to the streets, because I was there, it was extremely peaceful. It was just the sheer number of them that shook everything. I just want to say that I reject completely calling the Egyptian people as mob. And this analysis, I'm not here to chant die cancer, but I'm just saying that this whole analysis that ignores the people and just deals with institutions which are important, but ignoring the people that has been there for so many years, and they just people like analysts and scholars, they just cannot get over the fact that there are people and the people are important and they do change the course of events. Mobs, as you may call them, change the course. They have been playing a key role and they have been changing the course of events. And unlike many people here, unlike many people in the panel, I do believe in the Egyptian people.
Let me ask Maha, the spectre has been raised of civil war.
So can I ask a question first?
Well,
are we not people? Because I'm part of the Egyptian people. I think I'm
I
also
didn't
part
say
of
you're
the
not-
revolutionary
I
camp.
didn't say you're
So
not
that's
part
just
of
a
the
question.
Egyptian people.
Sorry.
Why
This
do
is
you
part
feel
of
I believe
Egypt
in
trying to
myself.
repress the other part of Egypt. That was square versus
What?
square. People versus people. Supporters versus
Who said we're
supporters.
trying to repress
One
you?
part of this decided to use arms and the armed institution, which is very dangerous. So now the ultimate arbiter is not the ballot boxes, it's the bullets. It's not the votes, it's the
What
arms.
bullets?
And we've been suffering from this for a long time. And there is no case I know that giving a dominant position for the armed forces in politics lead to something
They already
positive.
had a dominant position.
Maha,
in the
let's just
armed
come back
Well,
to
they
this.
pushed them back
The
then.
gentleman asked a
They
question.
weren't pushed
The gentleman
back.
asked
They
a
weren't
question
back.
about civil war.
You know better.
Maha, I mean, you
Yes.
could say, actually, given the size of Egypt, and given the extraordinary events of the last week, it is surprising that not more people have been killed.
Yes. I think that essentially Egyptians of all camps don't want to resort to violence. And this is why I find it very difficult to see this finger pointing at the Brotherhood and their connection with violence. I think that all groups really don't want to resort to it. You may have a minority, you may have individuals that are frustrated that may turn to violence. But I think the issue here is that you're going to have a security order that is going to be so repressive that is trying to control that violence and play on people's fears of violence, and is going to ensure support for it by the public and support for its repressive measures because it's creating fear-mongering among the population. And I think that is the danger that we're at now, and that's where Egyptians need to start thinking a little bit more about where they want to be in a civil society free from the repression of the security services and the military, and that this is the real revolution that they've got to instigate.
Let's take another question. This gentleman here. I will come to you eventually. Yeah.
Actually, first question to you and to the media as a whole. We've been appalled to see the bias in the media, the Western media. I'm a doctor, I'm a Copt, okay? Now, in the Western media, we see, and all the TV show the demonstration, 30 million, 20 million, whatever, and Rabaa, say 1 million, 2 million. We are not denying that they are 2 or 3 million, they are 10%. The only problem that the whole media of the Western world, as well as head of governments, head of states, Obama, Cameron, everybody, supporting the Brotherhood because it is for their agenda. I don't know why. It is not understandable to me. We just had a month ago the Woolwich thing, which is radicalization, and we're going to have it here. And you are still supporting it. This is to you.
I think if they really supported the Brotherhood, they would have called it a military coup, and they have not.
Okay. All right. The other question, who are the armed in Egypt? Who are the armed in Egypt? Who are the armed part in Egypt? To everybody. Who are the armed? The army, yes. But who are everyone knows who are the armed people in Egypt.
Right. Can we take a question from this gentleman? Yeah. I'll come to you.
When people talk about Egypt, they tend to start life from 2011. And they tend to talk about the army as a big monster. And they tend to talk about the Muslim Brotherhood in a vague way. I would just like to make a point about the three things. First one, the army is integral to the patriotic life of Egypt. In 1881, the Egyptian army, led by Ahmad Urabi and defended by Wilfred Blunt in UK here, led the first demonstration, armed demonstration against the king of Egypt. The king of Egypt was backed by the Sultan in Istanbul, by religious authority, was standing in the famous demonstration, was standing supported by the foreign ambassadors in Egypt. And there is a very famous picture every small boy in Egypt see and learn of the leader of the Egyptian people, the son of the Fallahin, surrounded by the Fallahin, Egyptian and Sudanese, in front of the Turkish king, who is supported by the West and by political Islam. So the army had a long life, strong life in the memory and in the life of the Egyptian nation. Secondly, not all army people are the same. You are talking as if Egypt lives in a complete vacuum of socio-economic structure. President Nasser masterminded with the support of the people. He was a third world leader in everywhere in the world. He masterminded the largest social mobility in the history of Egypt. President Sadat, who followed him, masterminded the democratization of Egypt. So this is about the army, and we are not ashamed of supporting General El-Sisi, who took the side of the Egyptian people. The Egyptian people know when the army comes in the street that the army would support them. So General El-Sisi is inheriting that long line of patriotism. Let me just say something else. Second thing, you're assuming that the Egyptian people have a massive...
I'm not assuming anything.
Yeah. No, not you, but the media. The media is assuming that the Egyptian nation has gone into a state of collective, massive amnesia since 2011, and that the Muslim Brotherhood group is just a cuddly, lovely organization. While the big questions that is facing the Egyptian people are the following. This is an organization who introduced armed struggle, jihad, who supported and played a big role in recruiting people in Afghanistan, who supports the Muslim Brotherhood in Syria. Let me finish.
Can we go back to your point about the army and turn that into a question for Mohammed?
Yes, I'll just say something about the Muslim Brotherhood because it's very important. The Islamic groups in Egypt, either they have to denounce violence, and I'm asking Mrs. Azam, can she denounce Sayyid Qutb, who wrote the book Ma'alim al-Tariq, who was the master of saying that the society is kafir and the Islamist, if she's saying that. Second point is the Muslim Brotherhood group has to obey the law. We can't have this double act of a democratic Islamic party and a secret organization that has got an international arm called the International Muslim Group that function here. I don't want to accuse anybody. You know, it is known that in Egypt, Egypt now is witnessing terrorists from Syria and from everywhere in the world. Thank you.
Can I just say one word, because you did mention, you want to come back to me.
Just in a second. Mohammed, I mean, you've described the army as the most respected institution in Egypt, and you'll see pictures of General Sisi being held up in Tahrir Square as a national hero for what he's done. But isn't the relationship actually much more love-hate in the sense that people need the army, they rely on the army, it's the institution that works in Egypt, but they only wanted to go so far?
Yeah, I mean the army is of course a pillar of the Egyptian state, but it's important to realize here that there are several forces at play now in Egypt. There is the army who wants to protect and maintain a certain status. You have Islamist groups who want to push a certain model of Islamic state against the will of sections of the society. Of course, they have supporters, but there are sections of the Egyptian society who refuse this Islamic project, as they call it. And then you have the secularists who call for an inclusive society, a democratic state, and you have the external influence, because Egypt is an important country in the Middle East, and whatever happens in Egypt will have an impact on what the arrangements that will happen in other countries around us. So there's lots of interference from outside, from Gulf states, from Iran, from the West, from all over the place. Now, when it comes to violence, what we're seeing now is that every force that is at play now in Egypt are ready to use violence. The army is using violence. The Islamists are using violence, and even sections of the pro-democracy. I mean, some of the extreme anarchists who I spoke to have told me that they are active at some stage. They were actively seeking to arm themselves.
I'm going to take another question.
Because it seems
there's no clarity.
There are about 8 people waiting to ask questions. Can I just ask this lady here, please? We could go on all night, but unfortunately we haven't got on.
Thank you. Dina, this question is to you. I heard that after ousting Morsi, suddenly everything has gone back to normal. Oh, sorry. I heard that after ousting Morsi, the gas lines have disappeared, electricity has magically reappeared, police have reappeared on the streets. How do you explain this? There was an article published yesterday that said that that everything has gone back to normal after chaos, and that there may have been a concerted effort by institutions to undermine Morsi
To
while he
create
was in power.
chaos in order to justify military action. Yeah.
And you're asking me this question, why?
Oh, I was just wondering whether you think that there was a campaign to undermine Morsi.
I don't think so. I think Morsi's policies were really a failure.
So how do you explain the fact that everything has gone back to normal?
I don't have a conspiracy theory that would satisfy you. I'm sorry.
Sorry, could you just briefly give this lady a microphone? She's going to explain.
In power, a few years ago, when he was criticizing Mubarak, he was saying that this is a tool used by governments to create a crisis and then solve it and take credit. And that's all I'm saying.
If anything, with
and
the
frankly, I feel very sorry for Dina and this biased
with
panel
the same
having to defend the revolution.
We can say that he himself is the one who was creating the crisis so that he can solve it, or to make people delusional, or to make people more possessed by something else.
I think there is a genuine question. I was standing outside the Muslim Brotherhood headquarters when it was being looted. The police were there. They stood there. They did nothing. Yep. And you have to ask.
Stand outside the Constitutional Court when they besieged it? Did you stand beside the Constitutional Court when they sieged it?
When?
No,
I didn't.
Well, you weren't there.
There is an issue about.
Did you know that they sieged also the TV station?
Media state.
Did you know that?
I would just take another question.
3,500 judges.
Please.
You know the judiciary.
Can we get another question, please?
Yes.
Thank you.
I was just wondering, this is a general question, maybe more to you, about could it be that democracy in general is having a crisis? We are seeing in the UK, we walked out, I don't know how many millions against the war. We walked away against the congestion charge. We had 94%. It still took place.
Can you speak into the microphone?
We had 94%. I have a very loud voice. I don't know if you'll be able to take it. Could it be that a very awakened people is intimidating the world at the moment while we're all very voyeuristic, looking at an awakened people that's trying to sort? I want to love her. We are a people. We are a mass culture. We are a river culture. We walk as one. We've seen 33 million people walk as one. I feel that the West, that is my question, is suffering the notion of democracy, and observing a nation going through it is causing a worldwide crisis in how to present it. I would really like your opinion on that, because that notion of coup, not coup, who are they, who's putting money in Egypt, who's got an agenda, as somebody who works in theater, I feel we are suffering a war of projections. And we would like to say who we are, even if we're so hot. We're hot-tempered. We'll hug at the end. We are Egypt. We are an amazing nation. You watch. But I would like an answer. Is democracy having a crisis?
Can I
briefly say something?
I've been spoken for like 15 minutes.
I think a lot of journalists, myself included, work on the basis that if both sides say you've got it wrong, you've probably got it about right. And while the events were happening last week, I coined this word, revocation, as a way of trying to justify to both sides what was happening. It failed, because the people who said it was a coup could not accept that it was a revolution, and the people who said it was a revolution could not accept it was a coup. These definitions do matter. I think what we've heard tonight is an example of how heated this whole thing is, and actually quite how dangerous it is for journalists at the moment in Egypt. Because you go.
Is democracy having a crisis? Are we doing okay? Is it a system that we should all be looking at?
I think we're seeing. All I can say is I think we're witnessing an interesting summer from Rio to Istanbul to Cairo, where a different definition of democracy, a street democracy, if you like. Although Mona would not call it that.
I beg to differ. That we're not unique in Egypt. People have come out onto the streets and come to power on the back of tanks before. So to make it seem unique, to make this case seem absolutely unique is not true. It's true people have come out in huge numbers throughout the world, and it is people power and all the rest of it. But the way they've assumed power today is typical of a coup. And this is why this gentleman who was speaking earlier, without wanting really to sound derogatory, really sounded as if he was someone supporting Pinochet in the past. When he says that General Sisi is a good thing, I'm sure that supporters of Pinochet sounded very similar.
Let me take another question. Gentleman with glasses there.
Thanks so much. To be honest, there's a lot of interesting stuff that has been mentioned here, but let me point out some of them. Mona did mention that in Tahrir Square we had some people who belonged to the old regime. Some people here know me. I have been opposing Mubarak since he was in power, and then I used to go down to Tahrir Square to demonstrate against the military. But at the end of the day,
Sorry, I was just saying Mubarak was in power before you were born, so not since Mubarak was in power.
I said I was protesting since Mubarak was in power. I mean when he was in power. Please don't interrupt me again. At the end of the day, because we are talking about inclusion and exclusion, and we are being accused of excluding the Muslim Brotherhood of the political process, she's trying to exclude Egyptian citizens from going down and practicing their right of protesting in Tahrir Square. And this is what the Muslim Brotherhood stands for. I feel very sorry for your personal story, but maybe you didn't hear about oppression during the last year of Morsi, and how many people were detained, and how many people were tortured, and how activists were targeted in protest by bullets in their heads. At least you didn't die.
Do you have a question?
At least you didn't die. Let me tell you that what happened on the 3rd of July when the army ousted Morsi, it's almost exactly the same what happened on the 11th of Feb. So some of the panelists here, and I know them personally, they were celebrating and cheering in Tahrir Square and here in London on the 11th of Feb. Let me tell you, if you call this a coup and on the 11th of Feb 2011 a revolution, let me tell you that you supported a coup in 2011. At the end of the day, I'm finishing because I would like to listen more interesting stuff.
You had a democracy and you had the right to go to ballot.
But Morsi lost all his legitimacy as a president way before the 30th of June. And I can go into examples why he lost his legitimacy. And we all know that democracy doesn't end at the ballot box. We need to correct when we see democracy going off track. And this is what the Egyptian people did. What the Egyptian people did is what the German people should have done when they knew that their elected leader, the Nazi Hitler, their elected leader is a dictatorship and he's building a fascist regime. Thank you. At the end of the day, I would like just to say one sentence only. The panel is really unbalanced. It's really unfair to have Dina only in front of these four. It's really unbalanced. Shame.
It was a plot. It was a plot. Yeah, it was a plot. Omar and Mona, if you could, Omar and Mona, if you could both respond to that. Couple of speakers.
So it's very, very interesting seeing, hearing some of those claims. In the time of President Morsi, when he was in power, there were over 10,000 political prisoners. Within 3 months, there was not a single political prisoner in prison who did not have a criminal charge. Can I just, guys, can you not just listen? It's just we're having a discussion and you're
too much, more than everybody. You have been given too much time.
So it's just I want to answer another one. I think everyone today would be okay. The impartial today panel. Okay. Anyway. My other brother, who I wanted to mention as well, he is the producer and owner of the Bassem Youssef show. I had 2 brothers. One of them is the assistant of the president, Morsi, and the other one owns the most watched TV show in the history of the Middle East. It is Al-Barnamij. It's called Tariq Al-Qazzaz. Bassem is a host. Tariq is a producer. You can check it up.
They are rich people.
Can I just...
That is not right.
So the opposition to President Morsi that was symbolized in Bassem Youssef was coming from the same house, from the house that was pro-Morsi. And this kind of balance was there in every single house. There were people who were against President Morsi, and there were people who were for President Morsi. We lived together without having to detain anyone, without having to oppress anyone, without having to shut only some TV channels. All TV channels contributed in what's happened in the polarization we're seeing now on the streets. And if the military was going to shut some TV channel, it would have shut them all.
Dina, can I bring Dina in here? Because what we've heard this evening, is huge sensitivity about the phrase military coup. Can you explain to the non-Egyptians in this room why that is so sensitive? Why can't you say, yes, there was a military takeover, yes, the army gave the ultimatum to Morsi, but it was a military takeover backed by millions of ordinary Egyptians? Why can't you say that and say, you know, this is a military coup, but I can live with that?
No, actually, I would actually want to ask the non-Egyptians, why is it so important for them to box something in a definition?
Why is it so important for you not to call it that?
I'm not... like Mohamed said, he said something very interesting. If we're going to call this a coup, then we should have called what happened. Actually, this time we have a civilian acting president. The other time we had a military council. So even if we were going to compare, we will have even more democratic revolution than the last one. I'm not obsessing about definitions. What is happening in Egypt, and it's not, maybe it's not unique to Egypt, is something that is really defying what it means to be democracy, and it's freaking everybody out. This grassroots democracy, the rule of the people, the power of the people is freaking everybody out. And I have to say that there has been a network of interests in so many think tanks, media commentators, Middle East experts, scholars, academia. There was a lot of money that was geared towards seeing the Middle East only through political Islam. And now that this has been challenged, this network of interest is being really shaken. And a lot of people are standing their ground to keep on holding on obsolete notions of what they believe in, just to have their PhDs, just to defend their positions and theories, so that they won't go out of business.
I'm going to take another. You've already had a question. There's a gentleman at the back who's been waiting for some time.
I just want to ask Maha. So I was in Egypt in 2011. I was in Egypt in 2011. I participated in the revolution back then. I was one of those people who believed that Egypt would become a secular, pluralist democracy. Obviously, that it became clear it wasn't going to be, and I decided to leave the country in March 2011 after the referendum, when it became clear that Islamists would take over Egypt, the Muslim Brotherhood. And but I have to say, I agree with almost everything that you've said, and I think this is a huge setback for. My initial reaction is this is a huge setback for democracy. It's obvious that the things the lady at the front referred to about the water and electricity, power cuts, all these things are obviously, clearly, the deep state is very much in the hands of people from the former regime. The army cannot blink, they cannot cough without, permission from the Americans. This is a fact in Egypt. And the propaganda now, it's somehow people in Egypt are convinced that the army was against the revolution, against this coup, a textbook coup, where the president was obviously arrested, and the leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood were arrested. And so the army was somehow portrayed as to be against the people, and are actually working with the Brotherhood against the people of Egypt somehow. People are convinced of this. The propaganda against them as well means that, well, in the last few days, after the massacre of 50 people from the Muslim Brotherhood, one of my friends here in London, an Egyptian, who was telling me, you can't really call it a massacre, that's a big word. And then he's saying, well, even if it is, that's 50 fewer Islamists for us to worry about. And it's unfortunate to see how, well, people are viewing this. Obviously, there is a lot of polarization. But my question is, people in Egypt, when I tell them, okay, what if we could have waited 3 years and then we could get rid of them through elections, the proper way. Now, I'm convinced of the incompetence of the Brotherhood. I met Tahrir Square about a year ago, 2 years before Morsi became president. I met the economic advisors of the Brotherhood. I'm convinced of their incompetence, and I'm sure I feel they would have lost the elections. what people in Egypt tell me is actually imagine if this deep state, which just removed them, imagine if the brotherhoodization of the state, as people have referred to, imagine if they succeeded in this over the next 3 years, there wouldn't be a chance. So the usual one man, one vote, one time argument that people who are managing the transition to democracy don't believe in democracy. Now, this is a risk that, as illiberal as it sounds, that to have the army take over the country, people see them as saviors, and somehow people
could you
forget.
wrap up?
So my question is, do you not see this as a risk that in 3 years' time it might be too late? You would have another NDP. The Muslim Brotherhood would be another NDP. And all this theoretical talk about let's wait and let the political process play out and then get rid of them in the next political cycle, well, it would be too late by then.
Omar, what do you say to that? That the country could not wait for 3 more years of Morsi?
Not because of economic mismanagement, simply because they don't believe in democracy.
Yeah. But the main issue is that we have to build a democracy and then to get them out by democratic means because they entered by democratic means.
But the argument is they were eroding that democracy.
I don't think they were able to. If let's say they wanted to wholeheartedly. They wanted to take over the army. They wanted to take over the police force. They wanted to take over the judiciary. They will not, I can guarantee you, they will not be able to do any of such thing, change this whole institutional culture that is very much anti-brotherhood in 3 years' time. And I can guarantee you as well, in the next parliamentary elections, the last time they got 40%, promising wildly and not in power. This time they are in power and they could not deliver. So the 40% will be shrunk, will go down. So they will not be the greatest bloc. And you have a parliament, because of the constitution that 64% of Egyptians voted for, have actual powers. It's not Mubarak's parliament. It's not the parliament that can question a minister but can never sack a minister. It has actual constitutional mandate. So by upholding these provisions and by upholding these institutions, you're actually safeguarding against the brotherization, against the Ikhwanization, against all these processes that could have started.
But the danger today is not brotherhoodization.
Consider this a counter coup. So this is against Morsi's coup in constitutional coup in November.
No, but the danger, but you're concentrating on the brotherhood. The danger is that what you're having is the vested interests coming back that are pro and DP. This is what you're getting back. What you have today is a counter-revolution through a coup. Plus, yes. So you have the old order, you have the old order, no, not all of them, but the people who have power, who are the interests that existed under Mubarak are coming back.
We are out of time, so I'm going to
just one on the SCAF, just one thing, because we've been through this before. We saw the exact same movie in Egypt while the SCAF is doing this. Mohammed mentioned it was a coup, but I believe it was not a coup. It was a revolution. No, okay. I believe the January. Okay, I believe what happened in January was a genuine unification of the Egyptian people against the dictatorship, and there was the only way, the lesser evil way, to remove this dictatorship was by the army intervention, because the other way was either the army splits, one side takes the street, and that was about to happen, and the leadership in Tantawis will take the side of and you know how this ended up in Libya and in Syria. The only problem with that scenario is that even in this transitional period, the SCAF mismanaged it big time. We're talking about now a massacre that happened against the pro-Morsi supporters, the 51. That massacre happened in October 2011 in Maspero, 4 Christian protesters. Happened in November 2011, 4 revolutionary, non-Islamist revolutionary protesters in Mohammed Mahmoud Street. Happened in the cabinet office, and Mohammed was there, 2011 as well. So the mismanagement, the repression, the idea that arms is the only way to settle scores, settle political disputes, and enforce your own will, this is so ingrained in this military institution. And I think the ultimate test for democratization in Egypt will be whether the constitution, the votes, matter, or whether the bullets and the uniforms matter. And I think civilian control of the armed forces is the ultimate test there. And it's not there yet. It wasn't there under Morsi. It probably won't be there under this president, who is appointed by a junta. And we're getting into a very... the challenges now are growing tougher and stronger. and we're further away from democratization, a few steps away.
Can I comment on that? I'm being told that we are out of time. Can I suggest that if you have questions for individual panel members, you come up and ask them? I don't want to end this discussion at all, but I have to. Final thing I would say is I hope to goodness that the divisions that we have heard exposed tonight can be healed in a country which matters greatly to many of us. Thank you very much.
Sorry?